The challenge arrived at Brennan Birchfield's doorstep in the form of a 7-foot-tall orc woman whose green skin seemed to shimmer with barely contained fury in the pre-dawn light, her small tusks gleaming as she bared her teeth and demanded satisfaction for an insult he could not recall ever giving. Brennan stood in the doorway of his modest farmhouse, still pulling on his shirt, and stared up at the warrior woman who had apparently traveled through the night to reach his remote homestead at the edge of the Thornwold territory. Her muscular frame was clad in worn leather armor that had seen countless battles, and her long black hair was pulled back in a series of intricate braids that spoke of orcish military tradition. In her right hand, she gripped a practiced sword, the wooden blade scarred from years of training. "I am Grusha of the Ironjaw clan," she announced, her voice carrying across the empty fields that surrounded his farm. 3 days passed. You spoke words of insult against my honor in the trading post of Millbrook. I demand satisfaction. We duel at dawn, human. Prepare yourself." Brennan rubbed his eyes, trying to process the accusation. He had indeed been to Millbrook 3 days ago, selling his autumn harvest of wheat and purchasing winter supplies. But he could not remember speaking to any orc, let alone insulting one. The trading post had been crowded with frontier settlers and merchants, voices raised in haggling and gossip. "I think there has been a mistake," Brennan said carefully, keeping his hands visible and his tone respectful. He had lived on the frontier long enough to know that orcs took matters of honor with deadly seriousness. "I do not recall speaking any words against you. Perhaps you have mistaken me for someone else." Grusha's eyes narrowed, and for a moment Brennan saw something flicker in their amber depths that might have been uncertainty. But then her jaw set with determination, and she planted the practiced sword into the earth before her like a battle standard. "You wore a shirt of blue linen with buttons of bone. You carried a leather satchel with the mark of a wheat sheaf burned into its side. You stood near the grain scales, speaking with the merchant Aldrich. These details were given to me by one who witnessed your words." She leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to something between a growl and a plea. "Do not add dishonor to dishonor by pretending ignorance. Face me, human. Let combat decide the truth of the matter." Brennan's mind raced. Everything she described was accurate, down to the specific shirt he had worn that day. But he still could not remember the moment she referenced. He had spoken with Aldrich about grain prices and weather predictions for the coming winter. There had been other farmers nearby, some rough-spoken men from the northern settlements who had been drinking ale despite the early hour. Then a memory surfaced, hazy but troubling. One of those northern farmers had been telling crude jokes about orcs, mocking their customs and appearance. Brennan had not participated, but he had not spoken against it either. He had simply continued his business, uncomfortable but unwilling to cause a scene. Could his silence have been interpreted as agreement, or had someone deliberately pointed him out as the source of the insults? The sky was beginning to lighten along the eastern horizon, painting the scattered clouds in shades of gold and amber. True dawn was approaching, and with it, the appointed hour of their duel. "I will face you," Brennan said finally, though his heart was hammering in his chest. "But I swear on my father's grave that I spoke no deliberate insult against you or your clan. If words were spoken, they were not mine, though I may be guilty of remaining silent when honor should have moved me to speak." He met her eyes steadily. "I am not a warrior, Grusha of the Ironjaw clan. I am a farmer, but I will not shame myself by refusing your challenge." Something in Grusha's expression shifted at his words. The rigid certainty seemed to waver, replaced by a complexity of emotion that Brennan could not fully read. But she nodded sharply, and turned to retrieve a second practice sword from where she had leaned it against his fence post. "You have until the sun crests the horizon to prepare yourself," she said, tossing him the weapon. "We fight until first blood or submission. I have no wish to kill you, human, but I will have satisfaction." Brennan caught the practice sword awkwardly. It was heavier than he expected, the weight distributed differently than the tools he was accustomed to wielding. He had learned some basic sword work during his 2 years of militia service when he was younger, but that had been nearly a decade ago, and even then, he had been mediocre at best. His talents had always run toward cultivation rather than combat, toward coaxing life from the earth rather than taking it. He stepped out into the yard, rolling his shoulders to loosen the tension in his muscles. The grass was wet with dew, and the air carried the crisp bite of approaching winter. In a few hours, he had planned to begin reinforcing the chicken coop against the cold months ahead. Now he stood preparing to fight an orc warrior who clearly possessed skills far beyond his own. "May I ask," Brennan said as he took a tentative stance, trying to remember the proper form, "who told you that I had spoken against your honor?" Grusha moved through a series of warm-up exercises, her movements fluid and precise despite her size. "A human woman with hair the color of straw. She approached me in Millbrook, said she had witnessed the insults and felt it was her duty to inform me. She described you and told me where I could find your farm." The orc woman's voice carried a note of bitterness. She seemed most eager to see justice done. Brennan's stomach sank. He knew exactly who Grusha was describing. Clara Winters, a widow from the neighboring settlement who had been pursuing him with unwanted attention for the past year. He had politely but firmly rejected her advances multiple times, and apparently she had decided that if she could not have him, she would destroy him in a different way. By directing an angry orc warrior to his door based on lies or deliberate misinterpretation, she had potentially signed his death warrant. "The woman you describe has reason to bear me ill will," Brennan said carefully. "Not because I wronged her, but because I would not give her what she wanted. I believe you have been used as a weapon against me, Grusha of the Ironjaw clan. But I understand that this does not absolve me in your eyes. If I remained silent when honor demanded speech, then I am still guilty of cowardice." The sun was breaking over the horizon now, flooding the farmyard with golden light. Grusha turned to face him fully, and Brennan could see the conflict written across her features. Her jaw was tight, her grip on the practice sword white-knuckled, but her eyes held doubt. "Are you saying that you spoke no insults against me or my people?" she asked, her voice rougher than before. "I am saying exactly that," Brennan replied. "On my honor as a man and a son of this land, I spoke no words against you. But others did speak such words in my presence, and I was too much a coward to challenge them. For that failure, I am willing to face your blade." Grusha stared at him for a long moment, and Brennan saw her working through the implications. If he was telling the truth, then she had been manipulated. But for an orc warrior to accept such a claim without proof would be to show weakness, to suggest that she could be easily fooled. Her honor demanded satisfaction, even if doubt had crept into her certainty. "Then we fight," she said finally. "And let your performance in combat speak to the truth of your words. A man who lies fights differently than one who speaks truth. I will know what manner of human you are by the way you face me." She moved into a combat stance, her practiced sword held with casual expertise. Brennan attempted to mirror her positioning, feeling clumsy and exposed. He was aware of every disadvantage he carried into this fight. Her superior reach, her obvious training, her strength that came from both natural orcish build and years of warrior conditioning. His only advantages were desperation and the truth of his words, and neither would help him block a sword strike. "Begin," Grusha commanded, and immediately launched a probing attack. Brennan barely got his sword up in time to deflect the blow. The impact jarred his arms and sent vibrations through his shoulders. He stumbled backward, trying to maintain his balance on the dew-slick grass. Grusha pressed forward with a series of strikes, each one measured and controlled, testing his defenses rather than overwhelming them. She was evaluating him, Brennan realized, reading his movements, judging his skill level, and searching for the truth she claimed to be able to discern through combat. He focused on defense, keeping his sword between himself and her attacks, trying to remember the lessons from his militia days. Stay light on your feet. Watch the shoulders, not the blade. Never overcommit to a block, but knowing the principles and executing them were entirely different matters. Within minutes, Brennan was breathing hard, his arms burning with the effort of deflecting Grusha's strikes. Sweat ran down his back despite the cool morning air. The practiced sword felt like it weighed 50 pounds, and his hands were starting to blister where he gripped the worn handle. Grusha, by contrast, seemed barely winded. She moved with the confidence of someone who had spent her entire life training for war. Her attacks came in measured intervals, giving him just enough time to recover before the next sequence began. She was not trying to hurt him, Brennan realized. She was trying to break him, to see if he would abandon honor in the face of defeat, if he would beg or plead or show the cowardice of a guilty man. Instead, Brennan set his jaw and kept fighting. His blocks became sloppier as exhaustion set in, and several of Grusha's strikes got through his defense to land bruising blows against his ribs and shoulders. But he did not yield. He met her eyes when he could, letting her see his determination and his honesty. If this was how she would judge his character, then let her see everything he had to offer. Time lost meaning in the rhythm of combat. The sun climbed higher, warming the air and drying the grass beneath their feet. Brennan's world narrowed to the immediate necessity of survival, of keeping the wooden blade away from his vital areas, of staying upright when every instinct screamed at him to collapse. His vision started to tunnel, black spots dancing at the edges as his body demanded rest. Then Grusha did something unexpected. She stepped back and lowered her sword. "Enough," she said, and her voice was different now, softer but somehow more dangerous. "You fight like a farmer who has been conscripted against his will. There is no warrior's pride in your movements, no love of battle. You fight only because you must, because honor demands it." She tilted her head, studying him with those sharp amber eyes. "And you fight honestly. You do not cheat or look for dishonorable advantages. You simply endure." Brennan nearly collapsed, catching himself with the practiced sword planted in the ground like a crutch. His chest heaved as he gulped air, and his entire body trembled with exhaustion. But he forced himself to straighten, to meet her gaze. "I told you the truth," he managed between gasping breaths. "I am no warrior. I am a farmer who tries to live with honor even when it is not easy. I failed in Millbrook by remaining silent, but I did not speak the insults you were told about. Someone used you, Grusha of the Ironjaw clan. They used your honor and your pride as weapons against me." Grusha's expression shifted through several emotions in rapid succession: anger, shame, uncertainty, and finally a grim determination. She drove her practiced sword into the earth with enough force to bury it several inches deep. "I believe you," she said, and the words seemed to cost her something. "Which means I have been made a fool. I, who pride myself on seeing truth, was blind to manipulation. The woman who came to me knew exactly what words to use, exactly what details to provide to ensure my rage." She looked away, her jaw working as she ground her teeth. "By the laws of my clan, I owe you redress. I have wronged you based on false information. I have disrupted your peace and forced you to fight when you were blameless." Brennan shook his head, still trying to catch his breath. "You were acting on information you believed to be true. You sought to defend your honor, which is no crime. The fault lies with the one who lied, not with you for believing." "That is a generous interpretation," Grusha said, and there was a bitter edge to her voice. "But generosity does not satisfy the debt. In my clan, when a warrior wrongs another unjustly, they must offer service to balance the scales. I challenged you based on lies. Therefore, I owe you service." She turned back to face him, and her expression was carefully neutral. "By tradition, such service lasts from dawn until sunset on the day following the wrongful challenge. I am bound by honor to aid you in whatever tasks you require for the next full day. Such is the law of my people." Brennan stared at her, trying to process this unexpected turn. The fierce warrior who had appeared at his door demanding satisfaction was now offering herself as a servant for an entire day. It seemed absurd, almost comical, but the deadly serious expression on Grusha's face told him that she was entirely sincere. "I do not wish to impose such service on you," Brennan said carefully. "You traveled far to reach my farm, and you have your own duties and obligations. Knowing that you were deceived is satisfaction enough for me." Grusha's eyes flashed with something that might have been anger or might have been shame. "You do not understand. This is not optional. This is not something you can refuse out of politeness. The debt exists whether you choose to collect on it or not. If I do not fulfill this obligation, I am dishonored not only before you but before my clan and my ancestors." She drew herself up to her full height. "I, Grusha of the Ironjaw clan, offer you service from this moment until sunset tomorrow. You may assign me any task within the bounds of honor. I will complete these tasks to the best of my ability, and only then will the debt be satisfied." Brennan realized that refusing would insult her more deeply than the original false accusation had. By rejecting her service, he would be suggesting that her honor code meant nothing, that her attempt to make amends was worthless. And despite the circumstances of their meeting, he found that he did not wish to hurt this proud warrior any more than she had already been hurt by Clara Winter's manipulation. "Very well," he said, inclining his head respectfully. "I accept your service, Grusha of the Ironjaw clan, and I will do my best to assign tasks worthy of your skills." He paused, considering. "But first, if you are willing, I would offer you breakfast. We have both exerted ourselves this morning, and there is no honor in working on an empty stomach." For the first time since her arrival, something that might have been a smile tugged at the corner of Grusha's mouth. "Your words are wise, Brennan Birchfield. I accept your offer." They walked together toward the farmhouse, and Brennan was acutely aware of how strange they must look. A human farmer limping from exhaustion and bruises, accompanied by an orc warrior who stood nearly a foot taller and could likely break him in half without much effort. His nearest neighbors were miles away, but he knew that news of Grusha's presence would spread once she was seen. The frontier settlements viewed orcs with deep suspicion at best and outright hostility at worst. By allowing her to stay, even for the prescribed time of service, he was risking his own reputation and possibly his safety. But Brennan had never been one to let fear dictate his actions. He had chosen to settle this remote plot of land precisely because he wanted distance from the prejudices and petty politics of the larger settlements. Here, he could make his own decisions and live according to his own code of honor, even if that code sometimes put him at odds with his fellow humans. Inside the farmhouse, Grusha had to duck slightly to clear the doorframe. The interior was simple but well-maintained. A main room that served as kitchen and living space, a smaller bedroom, and a storage area for food and supplies. Brennan's furniture was handmade, sturdy rather than elegant, built for function rather than display. The morning light streamed through the eastern window, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air. "Please, sit," Brennan said, gesturing to the table near the hearth. He moved to the kitchen area and began pulling out ingredients. Eggs from his chickens, bacon from his smokehouse, bread he had baked 2 days earlier, and fresh milk from his cow. Simple fare, but hearty and filling. Grusha lowered herself onto the bench carefully, as if uncertain that the furniture could support her weight. Brennan noticed her taking in the details of the room. The herbs hanging from the ceiling beams to dry, the well-organized shelves, the carefully swept floor. Her expression was difficult to read, but he thought he detected a hint of surprise. "You keep a clean home for a man who lives alone," she observed. Brennan cracked eggs into a pan, the sizzle filling the comfortable silence. "My mother raised me to believe that how we keep our homes reflects how we keep our lives. A clean space is a clear mind," she used to say. He glanced over his shoulder at his unexpected guest. "Besides, when you live alone, you cannot blame disorder on anyone but yourself. That tends to encourage tidiness." "A wise philosophy," Grusha said. Her eyes continued to roam the room, and Brennan realized she was searching for something. Weapons, perhaps, or signs of wealth worth stealing. Or maybe she was simply trying to understand the kind of man he was through the environment he had created. As the bacon began to cook, filling the room with its rich aroma, Brennan found himself studying Grusha in return. Up close and in better light, he could see details he had missed during their confrontation. Her armor, while well-maintained, was old and showed signs of extensive repair. Her hands bore the calluses of constant weapon work, but also older scars that spoke of serious injuries survived. There was a thin line of lighter green skin along her left forearm that suggested a deep cut, long-healed. Her face, while strong and angular in the orcish fashion, had a certain symmetry that humans might consider attractive if they could look past their prejudices. She was younger than he had initially thought, probably not much older than his own 28 years. There was a weariness in her eyes that came not from physical exhaustion but from something deeper, a soul tiredness that Brennan recognized because he sometimes saw it in his own reflection. "How long have you been on your own?" Grusha asked suddenly, pulling Brennan from his thoughts. He turned the bacon carefully before answering. 4 years. I purchased this land with money saved from my militia service and my work on other farms. It took 2 years to clear enough ground for proper planting, another year to build this house and the outbuildings. This is my second full harvest." He plated the food and brought it to the table, setting a generous portion before Grusha and taking a smaller helping for himself. "And you? How long have you been a warrior?" Grusha picked up a piece of bacon and examined it before taking a bite. Her eyes widened slightly at the taste, and Brennan felt an absurd flash of pride at her reaction. "Since I was 12 summers old," she said after swallowing. "All Ironjaw children begin combat training when they are young, but I showed particular aptitude. By 16, I was leading raid parties. By 20, I had earned the right to wear 3 braids of honor." She touched the intricate braiding in her hair, and Brennan realized that the pattern was not merely decorative but signified rank and achievement. "Now, I am 26 summers old, and I travel alone, taking work where I can find it. Mercenary work, usually. Protecting caravans or settlements from bandits and monsters." "That seems a hard life," Brennan said quietly, Grusha's expression hardened. "It is the life available to me. My clan has exiled me for showing mercy to humans during a raid 2 years ago. I was ordered to kill a family of settlers who had built their home on what my elders claimed was sacred ground. When I saw that the family included small children, I could not do it. I helped them escape instead." She met his eyes, defiant. "The clan called me weak, said I had dishonored the warrior tradition. They cast me out and forbade any Ironjaw orc from offering me aid or shelter. So now I make my way alone, caught between the world of orcs who call me traitor and humans who see me as a monster." Brennan felt a surge of empathy for this warrior who had sacrificed everything to save innocent lives. "Then you made the right choice, regardless of what your clan claimed. Honor that demands the death of children is no honor at all." Grusha looked at him sharply, as if searching for mockery or pity. Finding neither, she relaxed slightly. "You are an unusual human, Brennan Birchfield. Most of your kind would hear that I am exiled and assume I am dangerous or untrustworthy. They would not invite me to their table or speak to me with respect. Most of my kind are fools who judge based on fear rather than facts," Brennan said bluntly. He took a bite of his eggs, chewing thoughtfully. "I judge people by their actions and their character. You came here because you believed your honor had been insulted. When you realized the truth, you immediately offered to make amends. Those are the actions of someone with integrity, regardless of whether their skin is green or pink." They ate in companionable silence for a while, and Brennan found himself relaxing despite the strangeness of the situation. There was something soothing about sharing a meal with someone who understood the value of quiet, who did not feel the need to fill every moment with chatter. Grusha ate with appreciation, but also with the efficiency of someone accustomed to field rations and uncertain meals. She cleaned her plate thoroughly and accepted a second helping with a grateful nod. After breakfast, Brennan outlined the day's tasks. The chicken coop did indeed need reinforcing before winter truly set in, and there were also fence posts that required replacement, firewood that needed splitting and stacking, and the root cellar that could use better organization. All were jobs he had been planning to tackle over the course of several weeks. With Grusha's help, they might accomplish them in the single day of her service. Grusha listened to his plans and nodded approvingly. "These are worthy tasks. You do not seek to humiliate me with trivial work or attempt to exploit my obligation for improper purposes. This speaks well of your character." She stood, rolling her shoulders. "Let us begin. Show me what needs to be done." They worked through the morning, and Brennan quickly discovered that having an orc warrior as assistants was remarkably effective. Grusha's strength allowed her to lift fence posts that would have required Brennan to use a lever and fulcrum system. She could drive support beams into the ground with a few powerful strikes of a mallet that would have taken him dozens of blows. When they moved to splitting firewood, she wielded the axe with such precision and force that she could reduce a log to kindling in a matter of seconds. But it was not just her physical capabilities that impressed Brennan. Grusha also possessed a sharp mind and an instinct for problem-solving. When they encountered a fence post that had rotted below ground level, making it difficult to remove without damaging the surrounding earth, she quickly devised a method using rope and leverage to extract it cleanly. When reinforcing the chicken coop, she identified structural weaknesses that Brennan had missed and suggested modifications that would make the building more secure against both weather and predators. They fell into an easy working rhythm, communicating with few words but clear understanding. Brennan found himself enjoying the partnership, the satisfaction of accomplishing difficult tasks with efficiency and skill. It had been a long time since he had worked alongside someone else, and he had forgotten how much more pleasant labor could be when shared with a competent partner. The sun climbed toward its zenith, warming the day despite the approaching winter. Brennan called a break and brought out fresh water and some dried apple slices he had prepared in late summer. They sat in the shade of the oak tree that stood near his house, catching their breath and watching the clouds drift across the bright blue sky. "You have built something good here," Grusha said, gesturing at the farm with one calloused hand. "The land is well tended, the buildings are sturdy, and there is evidence of planning and foresight in everything you have done. Many humans settle frontier land thinking it will be easy, that they can simply plant seeds and harvest gold. They do not understand the work required, the patience necessary. But you understand." Brennan felt warmth spread through his chest at her words. Recognition from someone who clearly knew the value of dedication and effort meant more than empty flattery from people who had never worked the land. "Thank you. It has not been easy, but it has been worthwhile. This place is mine in a way that nothing else has ever been. I am not beholden to any lord or landowner. I answer to no one but myself and the land itself." "Freedom," Grusha said softly. "You have chosen freedom, even though it means working alone and facing hardship without support. I understand that choice." She turned to look at him directly. "It is the same choice I made when I defied my clan. Better to be alone and true to yourself than surrounded by others while betraying your own principles." Their eyes met, and Brennan felt a sudden connection, a recognition of kinship despite the vast differences in their backgrounds and circumstances. Both of them had chosen difficult paths to maintain their integrity. Both of them lived on the margins, separated from their respective communities by choices that others might call foolish or stubborn. "Perhaps we are not so different, you and I," Brennan said quietly. Grusha held his gaze for a long moment, something shifting in her expression. Then she looked away, but not before Brennan saw what might have been vulnerability flash across her features. "Perhaps not," she agreed, her voice carefully neutral. They returned to work, tackling the root cellar organization next. This required descending into the cool darkness beneath the farmhouse, where Brennan stored his preserved foods and seed stock for the next planting season. The space was cramped for two people, especially when one of them was Grusha's size, and they were forced to work in close proximity. Brennan found himself hyper-aware of her presence in the confined space. The sound of her breathing, the warmth of her body in the cool cellar air, the occasional brush of contact when they both reached for the same shelf or container. He caught the scent of her, a mixture of leather and wood smoke, and something else he could not quite identify, something that might have been the natural musk of orc physiology. It was not unpleasant. In fact, Brennan found it strangely appealing, though he immediately chastised himself for the thought. If Grusha noticed his discomfort, she gave no sign. She simply worked methodically, reorganizing the stores according to the system Brennan described, occasionally asking questions about preservation methods or storage duration. Her interest seemed genuine rather than merely polite, and Brennan found himself explaining more than necessary about the techniques he had learned for keeping food fresh through the winter months. By mid-afternoon, they had completed all the major tasks on Brennan's list. The chicken coop was reinforced and secure, the fence posts were replaced, several cords of firewood were split and neatly stacked under cover, and the root cellar was organized to maximize space and accessibility. What would have taken Brennan weeks of work had been accomplished in less than a day thanks to Grusha's assistance. They stood together in the farmyard, surveying their accomplishments. Brennan felt the pleasant ache of muscles well used, the satisfaction of goals achieved. Beside him, Grusha seemed almost content, a slight relaxation in her normally rigid posture. "You have worked harder than I had any right to expect," Brennan said. "Your service has far exceeded any debt you might have owed. I am grateful, Grusha of the Ironjaw clan." Grusha inclined her head in acknowledgement. "The work was worthy, and you treated me with respect throughout. That is more than I usually receive from humans." She paused, seeming to struggle with something. "My obligation continues until sunset tomorrow. Is there truly nothing else you require?" "No other tasks that need completion," Brennan considered. The truth was that there were always more jobs on a farm, an endless list of maintenance and improvements that could fill several lifetimes. But he was reluctant to simply use Grusha as free labor, to extract every possible advantage from her sense of obligation. That felt wrong, like exploitation rather than proper recompense. "There are always more tasks," he admitted, "but I think we have done enough for one day. Unless you are eager to continue working, I suggest we rest for the evening. I can prepare dinner, and we can begin again tomorrow if you still feel your debt is not satisfied." Grusha looked surprised by his consideration, as if she had expected him to work her until exhaustion. "You would share another meal with me. Invite me into your home again, even though the day's service is complete." "Why would I not?" Brennan asked simply. "You are good company, and I rarely have the opportunity to speak with someone who understands the satisfaction of honest work. Besides, you must be hungry after all we have accomplished today. It would be poor hospitality to send you away without dinner." Something complicated crossed Grusha's face, a mixture of emotions that Brennan could not fully decipher. Gratitude, certainly, but also confusion and what might have been the beginning of trust. "Very well," she said softly. "I accept your offer, Brennan Birchfield, and I thank you for it." This time, when Brennan prepared the evening meal, Grusha helped without being asked. She demonstrated surprising skill with kitchen tasks, efficiently preparing vegetables while he tended the stew pot. They moved around the small kitchen space with an ease that suggested longer familiarity, anticipating each other's movements and needs. As the stew simmered, filling the house with savory aromas, they talked. Brennan found himself sharing stories of his childhood in a small farming village, his parents who had died when he was 17 from a fever that swept through the region. His decision to strike out on his own, rather than continue working land that held too many painful memories. Grusha, in turn, spoke of her training as a young warrior, the pride she had felt when earning her first braid of honor, and the growing discomfort she had experienced as she matured and began to question some of her clan's more brutal traditions. "I think I always knew that I would not be able to follow the path expected of me," Grusha admitted as they sat down to eat. "Even as a child, I questioned why we raided human settlements, why we took what was not ours, why we killed those who had done us no harm. The elders said it was tradition, that humans were our enemies and always would be, but I could not accept that an entire race could be judged so simply." She stirred her stew absently. "When the moment came to choose between following orders and following my conscience, the decision was easier than I had expected, but the consequences have been harder than I imagined." "Do you regret it?" Brennan asked quietly. Grusha met his eyes and her expression was fierce. "No. Those children lived because I chose mercy over tradition. How could I regret that? But I do regret the loneliness. I did not realize how much of my identity was tied to my clan until I no longer had it. Now I am adrift, belonging nowhere, accepted by no one." "You are accepted here," Brennan said before he could stop himself. The words hung in the air between them, more significant than he had intended. "I mean that you are welcome here, at my table, for as long as you wish to stay. Your company is not a burden, Grusha. It is a gift." Grusha stared at him, her amber eyes wide with something that looked like shock. For a long moment, she said nothing, and Brennan worried that he had overstepped, that his words had made her uncomfortable. But then her expression softened in a way he had not seen before, the hard edges of the warrior melting to reveal something more vulnerable beneath. "You are the first human to speak such words to me," she said, her voice rough with emotion. "The first to see me as something other than a threat or a tool. I do not know how to respond to such kindness." "You need not respond at all," Brennan said gently. "Simply accept it as the truth. You have shown me honor and integrity today. You worked with dedication and skill to fulfill an obligation, even though that obligation was based on false information. Why would I not wish for your company?" They finished their meal in thoughtful silence, and Brennan found himself studying Grusha with new awareness. He saw her not as the fearsome warrior who had challenged him at dawn, but as a person of complexity and depth, someone who carried wounds both visible and hidden, someone who had sacrificed connection and belonging to maintain her moral compass. She was strong in ways that had nothing to do with physical power, and beautiful in ways that transcended the superficial differences between their races. The realization unsettled him. He was attracted to her, Brennan admitted to himself. Not just physically, though he could no longer deny the appeal of her strong features and powerful build. But more than that, he was drawn to her character, her integrity, her willingness to stand alone rather than compromise her principles. These were qualities he admired above all others, and finding them in an orc warrior whom most humans would dismiss as a monster made them all the more precious. As darkness fell, they faced the practical question of sleeping arrangements. Brennan's house had only one bedroom, and while he would have offered it to Grusha without hesitation, he knew that such an arrangement might compromise both their reputations if word got out. Instead, he suggested that she could sleep in the main room near the hearth, where the fire would keep her warm through the night. Grusha accepted this without complaint, though Brennan provided her with his best blankets and a pillow stuffed with goose down. She seemed touched by his consideration, as if simple kindness was a rare experience in her life. The thought made Brennan's heart ache for all the hardship and loneliness she must have endured since her exile. Before retiring to his room, Brennan paused in the doorway and looked back at Grusha, who was arranging her sleeping space by the fire. "I am glad you came here," he said softly. "Even though the circumstances were difficult, I am glad to have met you, Grusha of the Ironjaw clan. You have reminded me that honor and strength take many forms, and that courage is sometimes found in the most unexpected places." Grusha looked up at him, firelight painting her green skin in shades of gold and amber. "I too am glad, Brennan Birchfield. You have shown me that not all humans are blind with prejudice, that some can see past surface differences to the person beneath. That is a valuable gift, and one I will not forget." They exchanged good nights and Brennan retreated to his room, but sleep was elusive. He lay in his bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet sounds of Grusha settling in the next room. His mind replayed the day's events, analyzing every conversation, every glance, every moment of connection. He had lived alone for so long, had convinced himself that solitude was preferable to the complications of human relationships. But now, after just one day with Grusha, his house felt different. Warmer, more alive. It was dangerous to feel this way, Brennan knew. Grusha would leave when her obligation was complete. She had her own path to follow, and he had his farm to tend. They existed in different worlds, separated by more than just race. Even if he had the courage to speak of his growing feelings, what could come of it? A relationship between a human and an orc was not just taboo, It was practically unheard of. They would face opposition from both their peoples, condemnation and possibly violence. But as Brennan finally drifted towards sleep, he could not quite suppress the hope that perhaps, somehow, there might be a way. That the connection he felt was not one-sided. That the woman sleeping by his hearth might see him as more than just a kind human who had shown her temporary hospitality. He woke before dawn, as was his habit, and emerged from his room to find Grusha already awake. She had stoked the fire and was sitting cross-legged before it, her eyes closed in what appeared to be meditation. Brennan moved quietly, not wishing to disturb her, but she opened her eyes at his approach. "Good morning," she said, and there was a softness in her voice that had not been there before. "I hope I did not wake you." "No, I always rise early," Brennan assured her. "Old habits from years of farm work. The chickens do not care if you are tired. They expect to be fed at dawn." He moved to the kitchen area and began preparing breakfast. "How did you sleep?" "Better than I have in many months," Grusha admitted. "Your home is peaceful, Brennan. There is a quality to the silence here that is different from sleeping in the wilderness or in hostile settlements. I felt safe, which is a rare thing for one such as me." The simple statement touched Brennan deeply. That she felt safe in his home, that she had been able to rest without fear, meant more to him than he could easily express. "You are safe here," he said firmly. "For as long as you remain, you have my protection and my hospitality. No one will harm you while you are under my roof." Grusha stood and crossed to where he was working, and Brennan realized with a start that she was standing very close, near enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her body. "You make promises you may not be able to keep," she said quietly. "If your neighbors learn that you are sheltering an orc, they may turn against you. They may see you as a traitor to your own kind. Are you willing to risk that for someone you have known less than a full day?" Brennan turned to face her fully, and their eyes met at close range. He could see the flecks of darker color in her amber irises, the way her pupils dilated slightly as she looked at him. "I am willing to risk it," he said steadily. "Because what is the alternative? To turn you away because I fear my neighbor's prejudices? To let other people's ignorance dictate how I live and whom I welcome? That would make me a coward, and cowardice is not something I can tolerate in myself." Grusha reached out slowly, as if giving him time to pull away, and placed her hand on his shoulder. Her touch was warm and gentle despite the obvious strength in her fingers. "You are a remarkable man, Brennan Birchfield. In a better world there would be more like you." "In a better world there would be more like you as well," Brennan replied. "People willing to sacrifice everything rather than compromise their principles. People who choose mercy over tradition when tradition demands cruelty." They stood like that for a long moment, connected by her hand on his shoulder and the intensity of their shared gaze. Brennan felt the air between them charge with possibility, with the recognition of something growing that neither of them had quite acknowledged aloud. Then the moment broke as the rooster crowed loudly from the chicken coop, announcing the arrival of dawn. Grusha stepped back, and Brennan saw something like regret flash across her features before she composed herself. "What tasks do you have planned for today?" she asked, returning to the safer ground of practical matters. They discussed the day's work over breakfast, and Brennan suggested that they focus on harvesting the last of the root vegetables before the ground froze completely. It was labor-intensive work that involved digging up turnips, carrots, and beets, then properly storing them in the root cellar. Grusha agreed readily, and soon they were in the fields, working side by side as the sun climbed into a sky scattered with clouds. The rhythm of harvest work was different from construction or repair. It required more patience, more careful attention to avoid damaging the vegetables or missing portions of the crop. Brennan showed Grusha the proper technique, and she picked it up quickly, her strong hands surprisingly gentle when handling the produce. As they worked their way down the rows, they talked more freely than before. Grusha shared stories of her travels over the past 2 years, the various settlements she had passed through, the jobs she had taken to earn enough coin to survive. Some of her tales were humorous, like the time she had been hired to protect a merchant only to discover that his wagon was filled with nothing but cheaply made chamber pots. Others were more sobering, speaking to the constant challenges she faced as an exile, the suspicion and hostility she encountered in almost every human settlement. Brennan, in turn, spoke of his own experiences on the frontier, the lessons he had learned about coaxing crops from difficult soil, the satisfaction of watching something grow from seed to harvest through his own efforts. He told her about the few neighbors he had, keeping their identities vague to avoid putting anyone in an uncomfortable position. Most were decent people, he explained, but set in their ways and unlikely to understand his choice to welcome an orc into his home. "Do you ever wish you had chosen an easier path?" Grusha asked as they paused for water in the mid-morning. "You could have stayed in your village, married a human woman, raised children in safety and comfort. Instead, you chose isolation and hardship. Do you regret it?" Brennan considered the question seriously before answering. "Sometimes I wonder what my life might have been if I had made different choices, but I do not regret the path I have taken. This farm, this life, it is mine in a way that nothing else could be. I am not living according to someone else's expectations or traditions. I am living according to my own values and my own dreams." He looked at her directly. "I think you understand that better than most people could." "I do," Grusha agreed. "Freedom has a price, and sometimes that price is loneliness. But even so, I would not trade it for the false comfort of belonging to a community that demands I betray myself." By midday, they had harvested the entire field, filling several large baskets with root vegetables. They carried these to the root cellar together, working in the familiar, confined space with the easy coordination they had developed. Brennan found himself once again acutely aware of Grusha's presence, of the way their bodies occasionally brushed in passing, of the sound of her breathing in the quiet darkness. When the last basket was emptied and organized, they emerged into the daylight, blinking as their eyes adjusted. Grusha stretched, and Brennan could not help but notice the play of muscles beneath her green skin, the power and grace of her movements. She caught him looking and raised an eyebrow in question, but there was no anger in her expression, only curiosity. "I apologize," Brennan said, feeling heat rise to his cheeks. "I did not mean to stare. It is just that you move with such efficiency and control. It is impressive to watch someone who is so comfortable in their own body." Grusha's expression softened. "You need not apologize for looking. I am aware that humans find orcish appearance strange or frightening. But you do not look at me with fear or disgust. That is unusual, and I find it refreshing." "I look at you and see strength and beauty," Brennan said, the words escaping before his better judgment could stop them. "The color of your skin matters far less than the person you are beneath it. And that person is someone I have come to respect and admire greatly in our short acquaintance." Grusha went very still, her amber eyes fixed on his face with an intensity that made Brennan's breath catch. "You speak dangerous words, Brennan Birchfield, words that could complicate both our lives if taken seriously." "I know," Brennan said quietly, "but they are true words nonetheless. I will not lie or dissemble about what I see when I look at you, Grusha of the Ironjaw clan. You deserve honesty, even when that honesty is complicated." They stood in the farmyard, the tension between them thick enough to touch. Brennan's heart hammered in his chest, fear and hope warring within him. He had laid his cards on the table, spoken more plainly than caution would advise. Now he could only wait to see how Grusha would respond. "I too see things in you that I did not expect," Grusha said finally, her voice low and careful. "Kindness, yes, but also courage of a sort that has nothing to do with martial skill. The courage to live according to your principles even when it would be easier to compromise. The courage to speak truth even when silence would be safer." She took a step closer to him. "You make me want things I have no right to want, things that seemed impossible before I came to this farm." "What things?" Brennan asked, though he thought he knew the answer. "Connection," Grusha said simply. "Belonging. A place where I am valued for who I am rather than what I can do with a sword. A partner who sees me as a person rather than a monster or a curiosity." She reached out and gently touched his cheek, her calloused fingers warm against his skin. "I see the possibility of those things when I look at you, and it terrifies me as much as it draws me." Brennan covered her hand with his own, holding it against his face. "I am terrified too. I have never felt this way before, never wanted anyone with this intensity. It has been less than 2 days since we met, and yet you have become essential to me in ways I cannot fully explain." He turned his head slightly to press a kiss to her palm, a gesture of tenderness that made Grusha's eyes widen. "But I am willing to be terrified if it means the possibility of having you in my life, of building something together that transcends the prejudices of both our peoples." "It will not be easy," Grusha warned, though she did not pull her hand away. "We will face opposition and hatred. Your neighbors will turn against you. Other orcs will see me as corrupted by human contact. We may end up even more isolated than we already are." "Then we will be isolated together," Brennan said firmly. "And I would rather face hardship with you than comfort alone. I have had enough of solitude, Grusha. I want partnership. I want someone who understands the value of honest work and honorable living. I want someone who makes me laugh and think and feel alive in ways I had forgotten were possible." He searched her eyes. "I want you if you will have me." Grusha made a sound that was half laugh and half sob. "You are mad, Brennan Birchfield. Completely mad. No sane person would choose this path when easier options exist." "Perhaps I am mad," Brennan agreed. "But if so, I prefer madness to sanity. What do you say, Grusha of the Ironjaw clan? Will you take a chance on this mad human farmer who has somehow fallen for you in the space of 2 days?" Instead of answering with words, Grusha leaned down and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was tentative at first, as if she feared his rejection or her own enthusiasm. But when Brennan responded, wrapping his arms around her and pulling her closer, the kiss deepened. There was passion in it, yes, but also tenderness and wonder, the recognition of 2 people who had found something unexpected and precious. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Grusha rested her forehead against his. "My obligation of service was supposed to end at sunset," she said softly. "But if you are willing, I would like to stay longer, not as repayment of a debt, but as a choice freely made. I would like to see where this connection between us might lead." "I am more than willing," Brennan assured her. "Stay as long as you wish. This farm is as much yours now as it is mine. We will make it work, Grusha. Together, we will make it work." They spent the rest of the day in a state of happy confusion, working on minor tasks but mostly simply enjoying each other's company. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing stories and dreams and fears. Grusha told him about orcish culture, the traditions that she had valued even as she rejected others. Brennan spoke of his vision for the farm, the improvements he hoped to make, the possibility of expanding his planting fields. As evening approached, they prepared dinner together, and the meal felt like a celebration despite its simplicity. They lingered over the food, reluctant to let the day end, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges and complications. But for this one evening, they allowed themselves to exist in a bubble of possibility, two people who had found each other against all odds. After dinner, they sat by the fire, and Grusha told Brennan about the stars as orcs understood them. Different constellations with different names and meanings, stories of great warriors and tragic lovers written in the lights of the heavens. Brennan listened, fascinated by this glimpse into a culture he had only known through rumors and prejudice. "There is a constellation we call the separated lovers," Grusha said, pointing through the window at a formation of stars. "The story goes that a human warrior and an orc maiden fell in love during a time of great war between our peoples. They tried to run away together, to find a place where they could be free of conflict and hatred. But they were pursued by warriors from both sides, and in the end, they were caught and killed for their defiance." Her voice grew soft. "The gods took pity on them and placed them in the heavens, where they could be together for eternity. The stars are said to shine brighter when two souls defy tradition to find love. You think the gods would look favorably on us?" Brennan asked quietly. Grusha turned to face him, and the firelight caught in her eyes, making them glow like molten gold. "I think the gods, if they exist and care at all about mortal affairs, would approve of any love built on mutual respect and genuine connection. And what we have found, Brennan, feels real to me, more real than anything I have experienced before." Brennan took her hand, marveling at how perfectly it fit in his despite the difference in size. "It feels real to me too. I know it is too soon to speak of permanence, that we should take time to truly know each other before making promises that will shape the rest of our lives. But I also know, with certainty that I cannot explain, that I want this. I want you. I want the possibility of a future where we face challenges together rather than alone. Then we will take it one day at a time," Grusha said. "We will learn each other's ways, teach each other our skills and knowledge. We will build something new, something that belongs to neither human nor orc culture but to us alone." She squeezed his hand gently. "And if the world condemns us for it, then the world can go hang." Brennan laughed at her irreverent tone, and Grusha joined him, and for a long moment they simply sat together by the fire, holding hands and smiling at the sheer improbability of their situation. 2 days ago, Brennan had been a solitary farmer with no expectation that his life would change. Now he sat beside an orc warrior who had somehow become essential to his happiness, planning a future that defied every social convention he had ever known. The days that followed settled into a comfortable routine. Grusha continued to help with farm work, and Brennan began teaching her the intricacies of cultivation and animal husbandry. She proved to be an excellent student, approaching agriculture with the same dedication she had once applied to warfare. In turn, she taught him combat techniques, insisting that if they were going to face opposition, he should at least know how to properly defend himself. Their relationship deepened through these shared activities, through quiet conversations and comfortable silences, through moments of laughter and mutual support. Brennan found himself falling more deeply in love with each passing day, discovering new facets of Grusha's personality. She had a surprisingly gentle touch with the animals, could make him laugh with her dry observations about human peculiarities, and possessed a fierce loyalty that made him feel safer than any weapon ever could. Grusha, for her part, seemed to blossom in the stability and acceptance that Brennan's farm provided. The hard edges of the wandering warrior softened slightly, revealing the woman beneath. She smiled more readily, touched him with increasing confidence, and began to speak of long-term plans as if her presence on the farm was now a permanent fixture rather than a temporary arrangement. But their peaceful bubble could not last forever. About 2 weeks after Grusha's arrival, Brennan had to make a trip to Millbrook for winter supplies. He considered going alone to avoid drawing attention, but Grusha insisted on accompanying him. She pointed out, quite reasonably, that if they were going to build a life together, they could not hide their relationship forever. Better to face the inevitable conflict on their own terms rather than waiting for it to ambush them. Brennan could not argue with her logic, though he felt apprehension as they set out in his wagon. Millbrook was the closest thing to a town in the frontier region, a collection of perhaps 50 buildings clustered around a central trading post. Most of the residents were farmers and trappers, hard-working people but set in their ways and suspicious of anything unfamiliar. The reaction to their arrival was immediate and hostile. As Brennan guided the wagon down the main street with Grusha seated proudly beside him, conversation stopped. People stared, and then began to whisper. Brennan heard the word orc repeated multiple times, always in tones of shock or disgust. Some people hurried inside their homes while others gathered in small groups, watching with obvious disapproval. Brennan kept his expression neutral, and his posture relaxed, though his hands were tight on the wagon reins. Beside him, Grusha sat with warrior stillness, her face carefully blank but her eyes alert for any sign of violence. They made their way to the trading post, and Brennan helped Grusha down from the wagon with deliberate courtesy, making it clear through his actions that she was his companion and deserved respect. Inside the trading post, the merchant, Aldrich, stared at them with open shock. He was a middle-aged man who had always been fair in his dealings with Brennan, but now his face showed confusion and concern. "Brennan," Aldrich said carefully, "I did not expect to see you here with company, particularly orc company." "This is Grusha," Brennan said calmly. "She is staying at my farm and helping with the winter preparations. I trust that will not be a problem when conducting business." Aldrich's eyes flicked between them, clearly trying to understand the situation. "I do business with anyone who has honest coin and fair dealings." "But Brennan, people are going to talk about this. They are going to assume things." "Let them assume," Brennan said firmly. "My private affairs are not the concern of others. Now I have a list of supplies I need to purchase before the deep winter sets in. Can you help me, or should I take my business elsewhere?" The merchant's face showed internal conflict, but practicality won out. Brennan was a reliable customer who always paid promptly and never caused trouble. "Show me your list. I will see what I can do." As they conducted their business, Brennan was aware of other customers entering and leaving the trading post, all of them staring at Grusha with varying degrees of hostility or fear. Some whispered comments that were clearly meant to be overheard, speculation about Brennan's sanity and morals, suggestions that perhaps he was under some kind of orcish enchantment or curse. Grusha endured it all with stoic dignity, her posture proud and her expression revealing nothing. But Brennan could see the tension in her shoulders, the tightness around her eyes. This was precisely the treatment she had faced everywhere since her exile, and he hated that his neighbors were proving to be no better than anyone else. They were nearly finished with their purchases when Clara Winters entered the trading post. She stopped dead at the sight of them, her face cycling through shock, anger, and what might have been vindictive satisfaction. "Well," Clara said, her voice carrying through the suddenly silent store. "I see the monster found you, Brennan. Did she try to kill you as she threatened? Or did you somehow manage to appease the savage?" Brennan felt rage boil up inside him, but before he could respond, Grusha spoke, her voice cold and controlled. "I am Grusha of the Ironjaw clan, and I am no more a savage than you are a decent person. You deliberately lied to me about this man to provoke violence. You used my honor as a weapon because you were angry that he rejected your advances. That makes you the monster here, not me." Clara's face flushed red. "How dare you speak to me that way, you green-skinned abomination? You have no right to even address your betters." "Better," Grusha said, and there was ice in her tone. "You think yourself better than me because of your skin color. You who lie and manipulate and attempt to cause harm through deception. I have faced enemies in honest combat and shown mercy to those who deserved it. What have you done that makes you superior, besides being born with pale skin?" The trading post had gone completely silent. Aldrich looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. Clara was sputtering with rage, clearly unaccustomed to being challenged so directly. And Brennan felt a surge of pride for Grusha, who was defending herself and him with dignity and strength. "Clara," Brennan said into the silence, his voice hard. "You owe both of us an apology. You deliberately lied about me to provoke Grusha into violence. That is not only dishonorable, it is dangerous. People could have been seriously hurt or killed because of your petty vindictiveness." "I owe you nothing," Clara spat. "You made your choice, Brennan Birchfield. You chose a monster over your own kind. Do not expect sympathy or support from this community when that decision comes back to destroy you." With that, she turned and stormed out of the trading post. In the wake of her departure, the other customers began to murmur among themselves. Brennan could feel the judgment in their gazes, the certainty that he had made a terrible mistake. Aldrich cleared his throat. "Brennan, I will finish preparing your order. But I think it would be best if you conducted your future business elsewhere. Not because I personally object to your choices, but because having you here is going to cause problems I cannot afford." Brennan felt disappointment but not surprise. "I understand, Aldrich, and I appreciate your honesty. I will take my business to the trading post in Westreach from now on. It is further, but perhaps the people there will be less concerned with judging others." They loaded the supplies into the wagon in tense silence, aware of the eyes watching from windows and doorways. As they prepared to leave, a group of men approached, led by a burly farmer named Garrett whom Brennan recognized from previous visits. "Birchfield," Garrett said, his tone aggressive. "We want to know what you are playing at bringing an orc here. Is she holding you hostage? Threatening your family? Because if so, we can help. We can deal with the monster and you will be safe." "Grusha is not holding me hostage," Brennan said firmly. "She is my guest and my partner. We are together by choice, both of us. And I would appreciate it if you would show her the same respect you would show any other person." Garrett's face darkened. "Partner? You mean to tell us you are willingly consorting with an orc, living with it like it was a proper woman?" "I mean to tell you that my personal life is none of your concern," Brennan said, his voice sharp. "Grusha has done nothing to harm any of you. She deserves to be treated with basic human decency, something that seems to be in short supply in this settlement." "Human decency," one of the other men said with a harsh laugh. "She is not human, Birchfield. She is a monster, and you are a traitor to your race for taking up with her." Brennan felt Grusha tense beside him, preparing for violence. He placed a hand on her arm, a silent message to wait. "If refusing to judge people by their race rather than their character makes me a traitor, then I accept that label with pride. Grusha is worth 10 of any of you, and I am honored to stand beside her." He climbed onto the wagon and offered his hand to help Grusha up. "Now, if you will excuse us, we have a long journey home." Garrett grabbed the wagon's side, preventing them from leaving. "You are making a mistake, Birchfield, one that you will come to regret. When that orc shows its true nature and you end up dead in your sleep, do not say we did not warn you." "Your warning is noted," Brennan said coldly. Now remove your hand from my wagon before I consider it an act of aggression." For a moment, Brennan thought Garrett might escalate the situation. But something in his expression must have conveyed his seriousness, because the farmer stepped back, though his face remained hostile. Brennan snapped the reins, and the wagon lurched forward, carrying them out of Millbrook and back toward the open road. They traveled in silence for a while, the tension slowly draining as they put distance between themselves and the hostile settlement. Finally, Grusha spoke, her voice tired. "You have made enemies today, Brennan. Because of me, you have been cast out by your own people. I am sorry for bringing that upon you." "You have nothing to apologize for," Brennan said firmly. "Those people showed their true colors today, and I am ashamed to share a race with them. Their prejudice and hatred are not your fault. You did nothing wrong." He reached over and took her hand. "And I would make the same choice 1,000 times over. You are worth more than their approval, Grusha. You are worth everything." Grusha squeezed his hand, and he felt moisture drip onto their joined fingers. She was crying, he realized, silent tears tracking down her green cheeks. "I have been called monster so many times that I had almost begun to believe it," she said quietly. "But you see me as a person. You defend me even when it costs you dearly. How am I supposed to process such kindness?" "You process it by accepting that you deserve it," Brennan said. "And by staying with me, building the life we have begun to create. Let the rest of the world condemn us if they must. We have each other and we have our farm, and that is enough." They continued the journey home, and as the familiar landscape came into view, Brennan felt the tension in his chest ease. This was where he belonged, not in settlements full of small-minded bigots. Here, on his farm with Grusha beside him, he had everything he needed. The weeks that followed were not easy. Word of their relationship spread through the frontier settlements, and Brennan found himself increasingly isolated from the human community. Neighbors who had previously been friendly now avoided him. The few visitors he used to receive stopped coming. When he made trips to Westreach for supplies, he faced cold shoulders and inflated prices, the merchant's way of showing disapproval without refusing service outright. But while Brennan lost connections in the human world, he and Grusha grew closer. They worked the farm together, making improvements and preparations for winter. Grusha proved to be an invaluable partner, her strength and skills complementing his knowledge and planning. They fell into a domestic rhythm that felt natural and right, sharing meals and chores and quiet evenings by the fire. As winter descended in earnest, bringing snow and freezing temperatures, they were forced into even closer quarters. The farmhouse, designed for one person, became intimately shared space. They navigated the adjustment with surprising ease, both of them craving the companionship and physical closeness that had been absent from their lives for so long. One evening, about a month after the confrontation in Millbrook, they sat by the fire after dinner. Snow was falling heavily outside, and the world beyond the windows had taken on the muffled quality that deep snowfall brings. Grusha was working on repairing a piece of her armor, and Brennan was mending one of his shirts. It was a scene of domestic tranquility that would have seemed impossible just weeks earlier. "I need to tell you something," Grusha said suddenly, setting aside her work. "Something important that I have been considering for some time." Brennan put down his mending and gave her his full attention. "I am listening." Grusha seemed to struggle with her words, uncharacteristic for someone usually so direct. In orcish culture, when two people decide to bind their lives together, there is a ceremony. It is not like human marriage, but it serves a similar purpose. The couple makes promises to each other before witnesses, pledging loyalty and partnership for as long as both shall live. She met his eyes. "I know we have been together only a short time by most standards, But I also know that what we have is real and lasting. I want to make that formal, Brennan. I want to pledge myself to you in the orcish way, and I want to know if you would be willing to pledge yourself to me in return." Brennan's heart swelled with emotion. "Are you asking me to marry you, Grusha of the Ironjaw clan?" "I am asking if you will be my bond mate," Grusha said, and there was vulnerability in her voice. "I am asking if you will stand with me, not just for this winter or this year, but for all the winters and years to come. I am asking if you will build a life with me, raise a family with me if we are blessed with children, and face whatever challenges the world throws at us as a united partnership." Brennan stood and crossed to kneel before her, taking both her hands in his. "Yes, 1,000 times yes. I will be your bond mate, your partner, your husband if you will have me. I love you, Grusha. I think I have loved you since you challenged me that first dawn, when I saw your honor and your courage. I want nothing more than to spend the rest of my life with you." Grusha pulled him up and into a fierce embrace, and when they kissed, it was with the passion and promise of two people committing to a shared future. When they finally broke apart, both had tears in their eyes. "There is one problem," Brennan said with a slight laugh. "The ceremony requires witnesses," you said, "but we have managed to alienate both our communities. Who will stand witness for us?" Grusha smiled, and there was mischief in her expression. "The ceremony requires witnesses, yes, but it does not specify that those witnesses must be people. The orcish tradition acknowledges that the land itself can witness our pledges, that the trees and sky and earth are valid observers of our commitment. Then we will perform the ceremony here, on our farm," Brennan said. "With the land we tend as our witness and the home we have built as our blessing. When? Traditionally, bond mate ceremonies are performed at the full moon," Grusha said. "The next full moon is in 3 days. That would give us time to prepare." They spent the next 3 days making preparations. Grusha taught Brennan the traditional words of the ceremony, and he practiced until he could speak them without stumbling. They cleaned the house thoroughly, prepared special foods according to orcish custom, and gathered evergreen boughs to decorate the doorways as symbols of eternal commitment. On the night of the full moon, they dressed in their best clothes and stepped out into the farmyard. The snow had stopped, and the sky was brilliantly clear, stars scattered like diamonds across the darkness. The moon hung huge and luminous, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of silver and blue. They stood facing each other, hands joined, and spoke the traditional words. First Grusha, her voice strong and clear as she pledged her loyalty, her strength, and her love to Brennan for as long as she drew breath. Then Brennan, his voice shaking slightly with emotion as he promised to stand beside her, to support her, to love her through whatever trials they might face. When the words were complete, they exchanged tokens. Grusha gave Brennan a small carved figure of an oak tree, symbol of endurance and strength. Brennan gave Grusha a ring he had made from braided strands of copper wire, the best he could craft with his limited metalworking skills. She accepted it with reverence, slipping it onto her finger and holding her hand up so the moonlight caught the copper and made it glow. "By the traditions of my people and the witness of this land, we are bond mates," Grusha said formally. "What was separate is now joined. What was individual is now partnership. We face the future together, come what may." "Together," Brennan echoed and sealed the promise with a kiss. They stood in the moonlit farmyard for a long time, holding each other and marveling at the commitment they had just made. Against all odds, against the opposition of both their peoples, they had found each other and chosen to build a life together. It would not be easy, Brennan knew. They would face continued prejudice and possible danger, but they would face it together, and that made all the difference. Winter deepened, and Brennan and Grusha settled into married life. They learned each other's habits and preferences, negotiated small conflicts with patience and humor, and built a partnership based on mutual respect and genuine affection. The isolation from the broader community was sometimes difficult, but it also gave them freedom to create their own traditions, blending human and orcish customs into something uniquely theirs. As the snow began to melt and the first signs of spring appeared, they started planning the coming planting season. Grusha suggested modifications to Brennan's usual crop rotation, ideas she had picked up from watching orcish farmers during her travels. Brennan taught her the finer points of animal husbandry, and together they began to expand the farm's capabilities. One afternoon in early spring, a stranger arrived at the farm. Both Brennan and Grusha tensed, unsure if this visitor came with hostile intent. But as the figure approached, they realized it was an orc, a young male with the bearing of a warrior but without weapons drawn. "I seek Grusha, who was once of the Ironjaw clan," the orc said, his tone respectful. "I have traveled far to find her, bearing a message from the clan elders." Grusha stepped forward, her expression wary. "I am Grusha. What message does my former clan send after 2 years of silence?" The young orc bowed slightly. "The elders have reconsidered their judgment. The family you saved 2 years ago has prospered, and has sent gifts and thanks to our clan, praising the mercy you showed them. Other warriors have come forward, speaking of times when they too questioned whether our traditional raids were truly honorable. There is a movement within the clan to reconsider our relationship with human settlements, to explore the possibility of trade and coexistence rather than constant conflict." Grusha's eyes widened with shock. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that your exile has been lifted," the young warrior said. "The elders acknowledge that you saw a truth they were too stubborn to recognize. They invite you to return to the clan with full honors restored. They wish to learn from your experiences and consider new paths forward." Brennan felt his stomach drop. This was what Grusha had lost when she chose mercy over tradition. Her clan, her people, her entire identity as an Ironjaw warrior. Now it was being offered back to her, redemption and belonging restored. How could he compete with that? How could he ask her to choose his isolated farm over reconnection with her people? But Grusha's response surprised both him and the messenger. "I am honored that the clan has reconsidered its position. I am grateful that my actions have led to positive change. But I cannot return to the Ironjaw clan because I have made new bonds here. This human, Brennan Birchfield, is my bond mate. We have pledged our lives to each other and to this land. My place is here now at his side." The young warrior looked between them, clearly struggling to understand. "You would choose a human over your own kind, give up the chance to be a warrior of the Ironjaw once more." "I have not given up being a warrior," Grusha said firmly. "I have simply found a different battle to fight. Building a life across the divide between our peoples, proving that orcs and humans can live together in peace and partnership, that is a worthy cause. More worthy, perhaps, than endless raids and conflicts." The messenger absorbed this, then nodded slowly. "I will convey your response to the elders, but know that you will always have a place among the Ironjaw should you change your mind. And know also that there are others in the clan who will be interested to hear of your path, of the possibility you have discovered." He glanced at Brennan. "Perhaps bridges can be built, connections formed between your farm and our clan. Perhaps what you have started here can grow into something larger." After the messenger departed, Brennan pulled Grusha into a tight embrace. "You chose me over your clan. You gave up the chance to reclaim everything you lost." "I did not give up anything," Grusha said, her voice fierce with conviction. I chose you because you are my future, Brennan. The clan is my past, and while I am glad they have grown enough to reconsider their old ways, my path lies here. With you, on this farm, building something new and beautiful. That is worth more than any honor the clan could restore to me. As spring turned to summer, their farm began to attract unexpected attention. A few orcs, exiles and wanderers like Grusha had been, heard about the bond-mate partnership and came to see for themselves if the rumors were true. Some stayed only briefly, but others lingered, asking questions about how to bridge the gap between orcish and human communities. Brennan and Grusha found themselves becoming inadvertent ambassadors, living proof that the two races could coexist peacefully and even thrive together. One day, to their great surprise, a human family arrived at the farm. They were frontier settlers whose teenage daughter had formed a friendship with a young orc during a chance encounter in the wilderness. Like Brennan and Grusha, they had faced condemnation from both communities. They had heard rumors of the farmer and his orc bond mate, and they had come seeking advice and perhaps a sense that they were not alone in their struggle. Brennan and Grusha welcomed them, sharing their story and offering what guidance they could. That evening, sitting around a dinner table with both humans and orcs sharing food and conversation, Brennan felt a sense of profound rightness. This was what he and Grusha had been building toward, even if they had not consciously realized it. Not just a life for themselves, but a model for how their two peoples might learn to live together. As summer progressed, their farm became an informal meeting ground, a neutral space where humans and orcs could interact without the weight of centuries of prejudice and conflict. It was not always easy. There were misunderstandings and tensions, moments when old hatreds threatened to erupt. But Brennan and Grusha navigated these challenges together, using their own relationship as proof that understanding was possible. By the time autumn arrived with its harvest abundance, their isolated farm had transformed into something resembling a small community. A few orc families had built homes nearby, and a couple of human families who were willing to look past racial prejudice had also settled in the area. They worked together during harvest, shared resources during difficult times, and slowly, carefully, built the foundations of something new. One evening, as Brennan and Grusha stood on their porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Grusha rested her hand on her stomach. "I have news," she said quietly. "I am with child, Brennan. We are going to have a baby." Brennan felt joy explode through his chest, overwhelming and pure. He turned to embrace her, mindful of her stomach, and found his eyes filling with tears. "Truly, we are going to be parents." "Yes," Grusha said, and there was wonder in her voice. "Our child will be the firstborn of a human-orc bond-mate partnership in this region. They will grow up in a world we have helped create, a world where such unions are possible. They will never have to choose between their human heritage and their orc heritage, because they will be both, fully and completely." Brennan placed his hand over hers on her stomach, marveling at the life growing within. "They will be loved," he said firmly, "by both of us, and by this community we have built. They will know that they are not an oddity or a mistake, but rather a symbol of hope and possibility." As the sun dipped below the horizon and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Brennan thought about the journey that had led them to this moment. It had started with a challenge at dawn, with anger and misunderstanding and the potential for violence. But through honesty and courage, through willingness to see past surface differences to the person beneath, that confrontation had transformed into something beautiful. By sunset on that first day, Grusha had been kneeling at his table, not in submission but in partnership, sharing a meal as the first step toward building a life together. Now, seasons later, they stood together as bond mates and soon to be parents, having created not just a home but a community that challenged everything both their peoples had believed about the impossibility of coexistence. The orc girl who had challenged him to a duel had become his wife, his partner, the mother of his child, and the co-creator of a new way of living. And Brennan knew, with the certainty that came from living the truth of it, that he would not change a single moment of their journey together. Every challenge, every conflict, every moment of doubt had been worth it to arrive at this place of profound happiness and hope. As they stood together in the gathering darkness, Brennan and Grusha looked toward a future that they would face together, come what may. They had already defied the expectations of both their peoples. They had already proven that love and partnership could transcend the boundaries of race and tradition. Whatever came next, they would handle it the same way they had handled everything so far. Together, with honor, courage, and unwavering commitment to each other and to the life they were building. The farm that had once been Brennan's solitary refuge had become something far greater. A home filled with love, a community built on mutual respect, and a beacon of hope for others who dared to dream of a world where humans and orcs could live together in peace. And it had all started with a challenge at dawn, and the courage to respond with truth, rather than violence. As the stars emerged fully in the night sky, including the constellation Grusha had once pointed out as the separated lovers, Brennan silently thanked whatever forces had brought her to his door that morning. He had been challenged, yes, but he had also been blessed beyond measure. And he would spend the rest of his life honoring that blessing by loving Grusha with everything he had, by raising their child to be a bridge between worlds, and by continuing to build a community where acceptance triumphed over prejudice. The future was uncertain, as all futures are. But Brennan faced it without fear, because he faced it with Grusha by his side. Together, they were stronger than any challenge. Together, they could overcome any obstacle. Together, they would continue to prove that love knows no boundaries of race or tradition, and that courage and honor are universal values that transcend the superficial differences between peoples. As they finally turned to go inside, Brennan took Grusha's hand and squeezed it gently. She returned the pressure, and in that simple gesture was communicated everything they felt: love, commitment, hope, and the shared knowledge that they had found something rare and precious. They had found each other against all odds, and they would hold onto each other through whatever storms might come. The orc girl who had challenged him to a duel at dawn was kneeling at his table by sunset, not in defeat but in partnership. And from that partnership had grown something neither of them could have imagined: a love that defied convention, a family that bridged two worlds, and a community that represented the possibility of a better future for all. It was more than enough. It was everything.